My name is Paul Wilkinson, spelled Paulwilkinson.
Great. And we'll start the same way by your telling us what part, where you're from and how you ended up at Oak Ridge.
I'm from New Jersey, and I graduated from Williams College in November '43. And they came up, Eastman Kodak was the contractor for Y-12. They sent a representative around and interviewed me for a job, no destination given, no workload, no description of the work, and just did I want a job? And I told him yes. So they said, okay, you're hired, report to Knoxville, Tennessee, and get with it. So another guy and I both came down here. We had bought a 1932 Chevy for $40, and we drove it down with gas ration coupons and arrived in Knoxville and went to the New Empire building, which I don't know whether it is now or even if it exists. But they sent us out here to the project. We followed a work bus from Knoxville out here in a cloud of dust. And we got out here, there was a guard shack, and they stopped us, and then they sent us on to the employment office, which was located where 901 the Turnpike is now. And from there they sent us to the housing office, which is where the Red Cross building is now. Now the employment office was a great big room with a bunch of girls in it typing with carbon paper. And we were hired by, our paper said we were hired by the head of employment at Eastman Kodak. So they took us out there, a bunch of girls, and said, take your papers out of the typewriter and take care of these guys. So they did. And then they sent us out to East Village for our housing, and we got the last 2 rooms in the dormitories at East Village. And from there, we went to training buildings, which were the 2714 buildings, which are right behind the DOE headquarters building here. And we went through training there, and then they said to catch a bus out to Y-12. So we got on a bus, and we said, we want to go to Y-12. And the driver says, where's that? So somebody on the bus knew how to go, so they pointed out to him the directions to get out to Y-12. And we got out there, and we had badges, which were 3x5 cards with printed instructions on it. And the guards came in and looked at them and said, okay, and sent us in. And we would report to one of the buildings out there, but nobody knew where it was. So I was walking down the street, and met this big, rather impressive-looking fellow, and asked him where the building was, and he says, oh yes, my name is Harvard L. Ho. I'm head of process improvement here. And that's where I was going. So he sent us to the pilot plant out there for the calutrons, building 9731 XAX. And there were a whole bunch of us in there, and they started training us additionally right next door in 9735. Those are all building numbers out there. And we went through training there, and then we went over to the building, and the first job, they put us on shift work. The first job we got on shift work was to change a dry ice strap in the vacuum system. Well, the reason for changing it was that they had a power failure, and the dry ice strap had a whole bunch of crud on the outside that had been collected out of the vacuum system. And we were supposed to get the trap out of there and clean all the crud off the outside, put it back, seal it up again, and refill it with dry ice and acetone. And then they put us on that cubicle. That was different than the one that Dorothy worked on. This was the Alpha 1 cubicle. And I don't know whether you've seen anything of the Secret City, but this was a 2-arc calutron with 2 collectors, 2 arcs and 2 collectors. And we were separating a U-235. And we worked in there for a while, and then they sent some of us out to Berkeley, California. They had decided that the 2-arc was not big enough and not fast enough, so they built 4-arc calutrons, and the pilot jobs for that were out in Berkeley. So they sent 6 of us out there to Berkeley to work on it, and we went through the Berkeley with the pilot jobs out there and came back here and ran through pilot work here and trained people here on how to work them. And then we went into the production buildings where they had changed from the Alpha 1 system to the Alpha 2. The Alpha 2 system was 4 J's, Alpha 1 was 2. So we worked on those systems for quite a while. We were sent to Berkeley to work on the development of a larger calutron unit, which had 4 arcs or 4 J's and 4 receivers for enriched uranium, which would produce supposedly enriched uranium at twice the rate that the previous calutrons had, since we needed more of it more rapidly. So we went through that, and then we came back to Y12, and they had the equipment in Y12 at that time, which started up running that same equipment. Now we had trouble with some of the insulators and high voltage. High voltage on the calutrons was 35 kilovolts, and we were breaking insulators rather rapidly. So we got different insulators instead of the Westinghouse insulators with particular type of Wilkinson. They went to the Coors company and made them out of zirconia, and that worked very well. And we had a few interesting experiences, as you might expect with a startup of a new system, like water leaks and then trying to dry out the tank because water doesn't go with vacuum very well. But then we went on from that, and then we got into metallurgy to make bomb parts, components for atom bombs, and we started processing uranium metal at Y12 and machining the uranium metal to make bomb components. And from there, they started making components for thermonuclear weapons. Well, in making the components for the thermonuclear weapons, they needed fuel for the thermonuclears. Well, the fuel for the thermonuclears is a lithium compound. It's lithium hydride or deuteride. The deuterium is an isotope of hydrogen, one of the heavy isotopes. And it, with the lithium-6 isotope, gives you the fusion, which gives you the big boom for the thermonuclear bombs. Well, we had trouble with the magnets in the electromagnetic process. The problem being that the welded pipes for the cooling of the magnets, they did not sandblast them after they welded them, so they had slag in the pipes. And when you turned on the magnet, the slag went to the insulators around the conductors, and it shorted them. So we had shorts in the between the conductors and the housing for the cooling oil. And the conductors in these were silver bars that were about 3 inches by a 1/4 inch thick, and the government had borrowed 45,000 tons of silver from the Treasury Department and made these conductors. Because silver is one of the best conductors of electricity around. It's better than copper, as a matter of fact. And we couldn't use copper because that was going into ammunition for the troops in the war. So they sent silver down here, all rolled up in bars and as conductors in magnet coils, and sealed them up in steel and pumped oil around them and ran it through cooling towers to take care of the power that was dissipated in running the magnet. And let's see, the magnets were run with big motor generator sets, and the motor generator sets were so big that they had to call TVA before they started one up, or else it would have opened a whole bunch of breakers and shorted things out. So when they went to start it, why, they'd tell everybody, and the lights would dim, and then the motor generator set would get up to speed, the lights would come back up, and everything would be fine. Hopefully. Actually, they did work very well. But when they got them shorted out, they had to send many of the magnet coils back to Alice Chalmers, who were the people that had wound the magnets in the first place, and they had to reopen them up, rewind them, and somebody had to sandblast all the pipes and clean it all up and change the insulators from masonite to something else, paraffin injected maple. So that was a big hurry up job because they couldn't operate without the magnet. Now, what was the other part of the question?
Well, that was good. What about, did you know that there were, after that incident, that General Groves was concerned about sabotage and he hired GIs to be sitting amongst the Y-12 workers?
Oh, we had GIs in here as workers. We didn't have enough workers. I didn't know that he had any of them in there as counter-espionage, but he had some of the people that were here as counter-espionage. Like me, for one. If you see anything that's out of line, why, report it immediately to your supervision. We had one new man come in to go to work, and you were supposed to wear your badge in plain sight. And the supervisor on one of the shifts had his badge on his shirt, but he had a sweater over his head, and the sweater covered up the badge. So one of the guys goes up to him and says, "Hey, don't you know you're supposed to wear your badge in plain sight?" He says, "Yeah, it is." He says, "It is not. Where is it?" He says, "Under my shirt here." So the guy grabbed the bottom of his sweater, pulled up the sweater over his head. He says, "Oh, yeah, I see it now." Now, I thought he was going to lay him out cold on the floor about that point.
That's great. That's great. What were you told about the purpose of the work at Y-12? What did you know?
We weren't told anything except to enrich the uranium. Well, we were told that it was uranium and that we were enriching it. But since many of us were either chemists or physicists or both, why, we figured it out fairly early.
I'm curious, because a lot of people I've interviewed say they referred to some particular textbook, and they pored over this textbook, and then...
You couldn't find any books in the library or anywhere around that had anything to do with uranium. They were all removed.
That's interesting. So once you discovered, you figured out it might be for a bomb, or there was a uranium?
We figured out that it was for a bomb and that we would get a great big yield from it. Of course, we didn't know the details of what kind of yield we would get.
Did you tell the girls in the cubicle? Did you tell anyone outside?
No. There were signs all over the place, loose lips, sink ships. Is that right, Dorothy?
Yeah.
Now, there were some interesting personal tales, like we used to have 80-hour weekends because we were working shifts. So we came back from one 80-hour weekend, and when I came in to work, one of the girls that I was supposed to be supervising sent word she wanted to see me. So I went up to see her, and I checked out her equipment, and there was no problem with it. So I said, "What's the problem?" She says, "Well, you know, we just had an 80-hour weekend." I said, "Yeah." She says, "Well, I went on a party as soon as it started, and I got drunk, and then when I woke up, I was in bed with a strange man, and he said we were married. Now what do I do?" I said, "You talk to your counselor," because the company had hired more adult and mature women as counselors for all these women, because there were lots of them around.
What was the sort of average age of the girls working on the cubicles of that?
The girls were all under 25, and as was I at the time.
Did you know people from other parts of the project at Oak Ridge, K-25? Or?
No, we didn't have any association with other parts of the project at all in the early days. When I first got here, I lived in a dormitory in East Village. It was called EV2. And then I moved from there to a dormitory in Jackson Square called M7. And then when we got married, we got assigned a one-bedroom flat top in East Village on Altoona Lane. My parents had come down for the wedding. I took my dad by to see the flat top. He says, "You mean you're going to live in a chicken coop like that?" Well, everybody had chicken coops. So yes, that's where we lived. And Dorothy said something about explosions or something. Soft coal, if you ever try to heat with it, you've got to leave a flame in there burning when you bank it at night, or else the gases collect in there, and if they're not burned, they collect, and then when a flame comes up, they will blow. And when they blow open the ash pit door, and you have ashes and soot and smoke all over the house. It is a stinking mess. Now, we had so much black soot around from the soft coal that we had to clean the houses every few months because all the walls and everything were all black with soot.
Did you do that yourselves, or was that provided?
We did it. The coal is provided, and the electricity and the water. And if we had a leak in a pipe, they'd come around and they'd take a rag and pour salt in it and wrap it around the leak and then go away. And it'd rust close.
That's great. Oh, I love that. I just, above any, if you can keep going with sort of the details of life in Oak Ridge, you know, to sort of make new.
Well, whenever you went to visit somebody, you wore boots or galoshes or something like that and took them off on the front porch before you went in the house. That was normal. And nobody had cars hardly. We had buses that ran certain routes, so you took buses to get you closest to where you were going.
Can you describe the buses? Somebody described the buses sort of like a cattle car.
Oh, what they had done, they took 18-wheelers, flatbed 18-wheelers, and built plywood bodies on the flatbed with seats running up and down each side of the flatbed inside, and that was a bus. And you had a cord in there that you pulled when you wanted to get off. And if the driver didn't have a girlfriend up in the cab with him, he might stop where you wanted to get off. If he had a girlfriend up in the cab, he might have been distracted.
What was it, let's see. So I've heard about the tennis court dances. What did you do for entertainment?
Back then, work, work, work. In my case, I was hired in on a special payroll where I got paid for overtime, 95 cents an hour with straight pay, and overtime was time and a half. And my overtime pay checks, we got paid every 2 weeks, and my checks, first checks with overtime were something like 120 hours and 160 hours, so we didn't have time for much else but work.
Did everybody work as hard as you did?
No, they didn't work that much. There were a few of us, groups of us that worked that hard.
Which groups? The GIs or?
No, the GIs did not. The they had a bunch of GIs, and some of them they came here because they were drafted, and they were drafted right out of the working here, and they returned as GIs, and they were making less money when they returned than when they left. So they were rather unhappy.
So you were a lucky one.
Yes, they sent me down to Fort Oglethorpe for a pre-induction physical, and after it was over, the sergeant says, "See you in 21 days of general military service. You want to volunteer?" I said, "No, sir, Sergeant, supposing you're a draft classification 2B. He says, "Are you another one of those SOBs from Oak Ridge?" I said, "I'm from Oak Ridge. You can speak for the rest yourself on the rest of it. Get the hell out of here."
You said that one of your other classmates from Williams came down with you. Is that right?
Yes, I lost track of him shortly after we arrived.
And you'd been a chemistry major? What was your?
Major in physics and minor in chemistry.
Did you work during the Manhattan Project entirely on? Well, tell me about 9131. That's a building we're trying to preserve, as well as
9131.
9731.
9731 is still in existence. It's still running. It's doing separation of stable isotopes now. but it was the pilot plant for both the alpha and the beta calutrons. Half of it was for the alpha calutrons, the AX half, and the other half for the beta calutrons. And they were separately classified, and you did not go from one side of the building to the other.
So did you actually work inside this building with the pilot plant?
Oh, yes, yes. And when they sent us out to Berkeley, Frank Oppenheimer was one of the directors, who JR's brother. And then they accused him of being a communist after the war was over and all that monkey business.
What was Frank like? Did you meet him?
Very, very hard worker and very considerate of the people and very smart. And smoked like a chimney.
Did you meet Ernest Lawrence?
Yes.
Could you talk about him? Use
And
his name.
just met him once, very short meeting, and he thought a lot of Ernest Lawrence. Ernest Lawrence was a man that had a very high opinion of himself.
Sounds like you like Frank.
Frank Oppenheimer did not exhibit that same kind of feeling.
Let's see. How about General Groves?
Never met him. Don't know anything about him. But my understanding was he was a rough and tough general. And he said, this is the way it's going to be. I heard stories about him. Somebody was complaining to him that they couldn't get copper for something or other. And Groves says, you better keep your damn mouth shut and do what you're told.
Let's see. Do you think that these young girls who had no more than high school education, how do they do operating these fancy machines?
Well, initially, the people at Berkeley thought that it would take PhDs or master's degrees for the people to operate the calutron. And then they hired all these high school graduates, and the high school graduates did better than the scientists in operating these things because they wouldn't always try to experiment with it and change something or other, which didn't need to be changed. So that everything went a lot more smoothly with the high school graduates as cubicle operators than it would have with college graduates. They didn't know enough to try to make changes. They were told, do this, do that, move this needle this way, that needle that way, and that was it.
Did you ever try operating? Did you operate?
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
So what did it take to get the maximum amount of product?
To get the maximum product, you adjusted the conditions of the arc, and you adjusted the accelerating voltage for the ion beam so that you maximized the amount of material that went into the enriched uranium receiver slot. And you tried to focus the beam as closely as possible. In as much as you had both the accelerating voltage to fool with and a focusing voltage, which is called the G voltage, and you fool with the G voltage to see if you couldn't get the beam to focus a little better in a slot.
Now, were you involved in a sort of second step of the process, or could you describe it where they had to take the slots out and bring them into a chemical bath and try to remove?
No, I was not involved with the recovery of the product from the receivers.
So everything was strictly compartmentalized.
Oh, very much so, yes, absolutely.
Did you ever get down to the basement of the Beta 3 calutron building?
Oh, yes. I was
Can
down
you
in the...
describe that?
Well, the basement contained vacuum equipment, mechanical pumps, Kinney pumps so-called, which are rotary pumps that evacuate the calutron tanks. Because in order to get an ion beam, you had to have a vacuum. Otherwise, the air would destroy the ions. and you wouldn't have any ion beam. At that time, a lot of the operations were segregated security-wise. So there was a fence around different parts, and you had to have a different clearance to get into the different parts of the security fence. And one part where we were in was the Alpha buildings, and there was a particular security clearance there, and some of the guys had a date for a late date after the 3 to 11 shift. So, and it was quite a walk from where they were to the guard gate to get out for their date. So they decided that they were in a hurry to get to their parking, and they decided to climb the fence. So they climbed the fence, and just as they got up on top of the fence, here came a guard patrol. Needless to say, they missed their date, and they spent some time at guard headquarters. Now, we also had another guy here who liked to hike all over the mountains and hills here, and he was working here, so the FBI was curious as to what he was doing when he was not here in the plant. So they started trying to follow him around, and they finally called him in and told him, please don't climb up and down so many mountains. You're wearing our FBI people out.
That's wonderful.
Another one bought a motorcycle, and it was delivered by Railway Express in Knoxville. So he went in and picked it up, and he was driving it out here, and it caught fire on the road. So he put the fire out, and he got somebody to bring the parts back and bring it into the dormitory where he was living. So he rebuilt the motorcycle in the dormitory up on the second floor, and then in order to try it out, he drove it up and down the hall in the dormitory. And I'm not sure anybody really enjoyed the rum. Now, we had a few people that did not comply with all the rules. We were parked in front of a dormitory getting better acquainted one time, a gravel parking lot, and all of a sudden the car comes up there, whirls around, comes to a stop, the door flies open, a woman comes flying out, the car drove off. So we went over by the girl, and she's lying in the gravel and says, where's my goddamn badge? I gotta go to work. I gotta get my goddamn badge. So we helped the house mother get her into the building, and the house mother took her up to her room. And then just as I was leaving, I drove in on the turnpike, and there was a hill in front of the dorm there on that side, and she comes out of the dormitory there and falls down on the hillside and rolls down just like a piece of firewood or something, and says, I gotta get my badge. Where's my goddamn badge? I gotta go to work. Never did find out what happened to her.
So there were obviously people who couldn't handle all the freedom.
Right, and the place was dry around here, so you couldn't drink this, supposedly. Of course, you could get moonshine, you could get whiskey, you could get a fifth of liquor if you bought a gallon of moonshine. And the moonshine did not taste very good.
So if you had a celebration, let's say, would there be liquor?
Oh yeah, somebody would be able to smuggle it in. But if the MPs caught you at the gate, why, they'd confiscate it. Of course, we never did find out exactly what they did with it once they confiscated it. But we had suspicions.
So did you eat in the cafeteria?
Yes, ma'am. The first meal I had here was in the so-called Central Cafeteria, which was just off the turnpike by Jackson Square. And this was a dinner. I had fruit cocktail, roast beef, mashed potatoes, and peas, and milk, and it cost me 55 cents. Then we had several other cafeterias, and they had cafeterias at the plant. Now, some of the cafeterias at the plant were not necessarily too sanitary. We used to frequently have Montezuma's Revenge.
When you got your own house, did you still eat the cafeteria, or were you eating at home?
Well, we ate at home mostly, I think. Well, I ate some of the meals at the cafeteria. Not when I was working shift work, I ate part of my meals at the plant, at the cafeteria. But there were not many restaurants around town. There was one in Grove Center, and there's an Adams cafeteria out near the west end of town, and one in Jackson Square, as I said, and one in the east end of town. There are shops there now.
So can you think of any other things that I haven't asked you about that I should have, about the Manhattan Project or your experience?
We didn't ever hear very much about Manhattan Project as such. We knew it was the Clinton Engineer Works, and we knew we were building bombs and bomb parts, but that was it.
So how do you feel about your contribution to ending World War II?
We thought that our work here was a worthwhile effort and a worthwhile contribution to winning World War II. Talked to one of the fellows in the retirement center now, and he says, "Yeah, I was on Okinawa about to invade Japan when they dropped the bomb over there, and man was I glad." And I said, "Well, you're more than welcome. We were glad to help."